And welcome back to another episode of the Lotcast. We have a full crowd here tonight, Alec, Jackson, and Trey, and we're joined by none other than Raleigh sports writing legend, Joe Giglio. Thank you for joining us tonight, Joe.
Here. How about that? Let me use my technology. I apologize in advance, you guys. This is way past my bedtime, number one. Number two, my dogs are here, and my wife is outside, so they are going to be slightly rambunctious until she gets inside. So nothing like starting the podcast that way, but appreciate you guys for the kind words and for having me on.
No problem at all. Definitely appreciate you making the time for us tonight. In general, we will recap the previous week's game and then preview the upcoming opponent, but we're going to try and take a different tact for today. Given all of the news that's been happening in the college football landscape over the course of the last week or two, and NC State's been off, there hasn't been a ton to talk about football-wise, specifically about the X's and O's for the team. So we wanted to try and zoom out and have a little bit higher level of a conversation about the state of the program, where things are at, taking the temperature for the Dave Doeren tenure and all that. So let's just start at the top. And coming off of last year's disappointing season, what are your just like really quick thoughts on how you think this current season, the half of the season, has been going so far for Dave Doeren?
Well, at the risk of arguing with you on your own podcast, I don't know if last year was disappointing in the sense that I had very low expectations for that team. I thought they were a mess defensively. I thought they were a mess up front. So the fact that they got to 6 wins, the fact that they pulled off their annual win over Carolina, I actually thought, given Dave Doran's previous bad years, his first year 3-9, and then 4-8 and 19, I actually thought last year was pretty good as far as basements go. Now, of course, losing to ECU in the way that they did in the bowl game was obviously not optimal, but I mean, bowl games are they're like weird, super weird. The 50-year-old guy says, is maybe the only one who realizes what they used to be and what they are now. So to pick nits with you just at your start there, I thought last year was actually a sign of progress for Dave, and it was his best bad.
Mm-hmm.
Now, heading into this year, my expectations for this team were also pretty low, I'll be honest with you, because I still don't see it defensively. I think it's kind of played out that way as well. And I know there were some people who looked at the first half of the schedule and thought, they could get to 6-0, they could be 5-1, they could do this, they could do that. And there's always a danger with NC State when you go with the should as well. Once we get into that Virginia Tech territory, you all nod your head. You know these things. You guys have figured these things out. So obviously, losing to Duke again is not great. Dave's now 1-4 against Duke. It's kind of wonky that he's only had as many chances against them that he has in 13 years. But Mike Elko is proving to be one of the best coaches in college football. Fair enough. And then, but Henry Beelan V, I think is his name, was the kid who beat him in Durham with
that's a bad word on this podcast.
Yeah, I think Alec knows the number better than I do, but he had like 78 yards passing or some shit. I'm allowed to curse him, I assume. Curse or don't. But obviously, to me, the Duke loss kind of set the table for where we are right now with Dave, and then the Virginia Tech loss, which I accurately predicted, kind of just compounded it and put us in this situation where it's like, if you weren't a Dave Doeren fan before, now you got plenty of ammunition to sit here and play the hits. And if you were kind of in the pro Dave camp in the sense that he has outperformed his resources, and he has outperformed the historical number at NC State. We can argue about the schedule all day, but I think you're losing your ground in a start like this at 4-3 with some of the losses that he had. And that to me is what's unfortunate. And after living through the basketball season last year, everyone knows I had a better relationship with Kevin Keese than I did Dave Doeren. I was disappointed how the fans turned so quickly on Kevin. And I understand the gripes with Dave, but I don't want to see that the last 5 games of this season. I think Dave has earned a measure of respect, and I would like to see him get that respect. And I know it's really hard when you're paying the money that most people do, myself included, for these season tickets and going to the games, and you got to beg, borrow, and steal for a parking spot and everything else. And I know it's hard not to be frustrated, but for me, there's the dog. For me, that's where I kind of look at it and go, all right, let's take a half a step back and have a conversation that I think we're about where are they really financially, and where can NC State be competitive in the new landscape of college football?
Yeah, and you talk about the shoulds, and one of our favorite features that you brought up is the law of the wolf, and that whole idea of just when you have expectations, so everyone knows what can happen with that. But given the Kevin Keats of it all, and how that's very fresh in a lot of NC State fans' minds about it just happened a few months ago, and hey, Will Wade dropped out of the clouds for us there. Maybe lightning will strike twice, and we need to go find the Will Wade of football is a common tweet that you see online, and Will Wades don't exactly grow on trees. So we're of two minds of it. We've been very consistent on this podcast of being a very pro Dave Doeren show, and over the years, but even our stances are starting to slide just a little bit. We're starting to see that we're closer to the end than we are at the beginning, and whether it's this year or next year, it seems like we're in the twilight of his era. But one of my main questions is, do you think that Dave Doeren missed his window? Because you look at the non-Florida States and Miamis and Clemsons, but other teams like SMU and Louisville and Georgia Tech, and now with the financial backing that Virginia Tech is putting into their football program, there's a lot of an arms race that's now happening in the ACC. Do you think that without some insane financial influx, that the opportunity to win the ACC has passed Dave Doeren by?
Probably Dave. I mean, I really believe this will be his last year. I saw one of your online questions to Alex post was about, does he really think he had to be talked out of retiring last year? I really do. And I really do know, yes. I don't know if it was Boo now who had to talk him out, but I do know there was a conversation that was had before he talked to Boo. And I think if you go back and listen to the interview that we did with Dave down in Charlotte before the season started, it's year 13, and I remember calling one of his former comms guys and saying, I just had our best interview with Dave in 13 years. And I thought he was super honest. I thought he was very clear-eyed, to use a football term, if you will, made for TV. I thought he was a man who knew where he was and where he wanted to go. And it's funny, I saw Joe Selfo on Wednesday night in Greenville. And for the State fans, maybe 10 years ago now, who can't remember Joe? Joe is a pioneer, if you will. He was a grad transfer center from South Alabama and played that 16 season as a fifth-year grad transfer and started for State, played all but like 2 snaps that year. He did a great stabilizing job in a year that really kind of stabilized Dave Doeren. And, we talked a little bit about Dave, and we talked a little bit about those opportunities and some of those unbelievable games in 16. 17 to me was Dave's window. That was his chance. That was his best team. Clemson ended up winning the league that year with Kelly Bryant as their quarterback. They got a punt return from Ray McLeod. They got a 75 or 78-yard run when our guy Ryan Nielsen decided to take the entire starting defensive line off the field. So, I mean, there were some painful losses there. That Clemson game at night, gosh, what an incredible atmosphere. But to me, that was his best team. That was his real chance to win the league. And you kind of got to get those early in your tenure for everyone else to believe. I'm a big believer in that. And I think Herb Sendek kind of failed at that as well. And I don't I'm not of the camp that Dave and Herb, they really have, while both can be erudites, Dave's got a lot more of a folksy personality than Herb ever did. So to me, that was his window. Now the question going forward is, can NC State win in the new ACC? And I think they can, but I think look at what Virginia's doing, and gosh, obviously my business partner and my second partner for life, other than my wife, is Joe Ovies, and he hates talking about schedules. I mean, he hates it with a fucking passion, and I get it because any ACC team can beat any ACC team. But I'm sorry, Virginia would not be in the position that they're in right now if they had to play a few more difficult games. And if you look at the rest of Virginia's schedule, man, if Duke doesn't get them, honestly, I don't know who is. And that's terrifying to me. But it's also, it is, because I hate Virginia more than Carolina, more than Duke, more than anybody. Duke and Virginia are the two teams I dislike the most, the two schools that I dislike the most. I just think their fans are unbelievably arrogant and entitled, and I have no time for that.
I was going to ask where the UVA
came
from. That was an event. Honestly, that was just exposure.
I know. Yeah. No, I've been up there a couple different times. Yeah. Really, it's from online. That's a longer story for another day. But I think the schedule's so important. Getting some of these breaks are so important. And you got to take advantage of it. Like I said about Dave in 17, Clemson's just a little bit down. You got to take advantage of that. You got to go down to Wake Forest and beat them down there when you have, I think, 16 or 17 draft picks were on that team for NC State. So I just think the real key is you got to put it all together. Give yourself a chance. It probably does have to come early in your tenure. So whoever the next coach is, I think you kind of got to give yourself you got to believe in it, and you got to make the players who are going to come join you believe in it. But there's never been more greater examples across the board in college football right now of the ability to either compete for a playoff spot or compete for your conference championship. And I don't see any reason that NC State can't do that and have the right time. Guys, did you realize SMU has won their first 11 ACC scheduled games? They joined the league last year. I think they're good, but I don't think they're great.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
NC State has won 11 straight ACC scheduled games once since joining in 1953. SMU's done it in their first 11 games in the league. Okay? So, but I say this as a way of saying I think SMU has obviously more money than NC State, but I don't look at their roster and go, oh wow, they went and got X, Y, and Z. I think he's a really good coach. I think he had early success in his tenure and got players around him to believe. I thought I picked them to go to the ACC championship game last year. I thought their schedule last year was incredibly agreeable, and they took advantage of it, no doubt. But yeah, I mean, I don't know where you guys are on the Clemson scale, but watching them go down to Clemson on Saturday and just put it in their ear, I was like, really, Clemson? Really? You're going to let these new guys just come in and wipe their shoes all over your rug? Like, what are we doing?
It's crazy.
I loved it.
Did you?
you talk about hating UVA. I mean, for me, I was a State fan. It's like UNC, but it's like UNC Clemson for me. I've loved every bit of that. But I think it's interesting. When you talk about windows, one thing I really enjoyed through the Doeren tenure, which I was a defender of him for a lot of that time, was the window creation, right? And I've said this on the last show as well. I've always said it's really hard to do what he did, right? To put NC State in a position to win ACC championships with the level of talent, the talent pool that they had access to. And we've had that conversation already. But what's interesting to me is, and this goes into kind of the question I think we're going to go into next, which is what is a realistic expectation for NC State? If you take out Doeren's first 3 years and you chalk that up to a rebuild, which might be a generous thing to do, however you feel about that, and you say over the next 10, right after he had a senior class, he was a game away from either playing in an ACC title or going to what was then a New Year's Six bowl game in 5 of those 10 years. If you told me that those were the opportunities that we would have over a decade as an NC State fan, I would sign up for that without a second thought. Like that is great, right? Because that's never been. I think people have relatively realistic expectations of how often NC State is really going to be 7-1 in the ACC or whatever, being in that position. So yeah, so that to me was always like the forward looking like situation. Like this is a guy that's giving you a chance consistently, which you didn't have before. Joe, you said something really good at the beginning, that even for the biggest Doeren defenders, you've lost ground. That's how I feel as a Doeren defender, or as someone that has for a lot of the time, is I feel like that trajectory is gone. Like it's not really there. The game has changed. Everything about what makes up a team has changed. And I think Doeren can change. I think he's proven he can change with the way the defense has evolved from the time he was here. But regardless of what's happening, right, he's approaching the end of his interest in doing this. And yeah, I mean, if you look at the trajectory of where they are now, this is the first 2 years back to back that I've felt like the team has underperformed its talent level. Right, State had brought in a pretty good amount of talent last season. I felt really good about that offense going into that year. I was a big Grayson McCall fan. There's a lot of talent on that team. And maybe it's less true this year, but I still feel like this is a relatively talented football team on offense. I think it's playing below that level. And that's not something that I'm used to seeing with Dave. And so I guess the question then becomes like, as this whole thing changes, right, and the what defines a functioning program changes, how does NC State win going forward?
I think it starts on the offensive end. A lot of these teams that we talk about are creative offensively. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel offensively. I think there are some things that Robert and I tried to do. I think there are some things that Tim Beck tried to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of things that Matt Canada, as much as I disliked them, tried to do. Eli Drinkwitz obviously is the one who had the most success. And man, does that man owe Ryan Finley some money, and he's about to get another payday, whether he stays at Missouri or ends up at Florida or Penn State or wherever he ends up doing next year. I mean, he owes Ryan Finley a lot. So I go at this as a way of saying, every time there's a new coordinator, it seems like there's the same old problems. And my biggest complaint with Dave has always been game management, when to go for it, when to like go for the kill, when not to go for the kill, how to coach, how to try to win games. You go back to the Charlotte Bowl against Maryland, where he seemed intent on getting Chris Dunn some sort of record and winning the game 15-10, 15-13, whatever his goal was. I think offensively, they've always been too predictable on first down, and that is a function of Dave. That's not a function of the offensive coordinator, because he's had, Dez. He's had 5 different ones, right? So at some point, it gets back to who's the head man, and I feel for Dave in a sense that he can be very stubborn offensively. And Alec, you can do a much better job of explaining this to people than I do. But I remember the second year Dave was here, he looked at Florida State and Clemson, and he said to me in the offseason, he goes, "We have to get better receivers. We have to get better corners, because we have to cover their better receivers. And we have to get better receivers who can win 50-50 balls." And I think most of Dave's approach, which is what frustrates me, has been, let me get a Kelvin Harmon and win every 50-50 ball, instead of let me get a Kelvin Harmon, move him around the formation, and get him open. And I just, same thing with Emezi by the end of his tenure. It was you're going to be on the outside, you're going to be this, and we're not going to move you, we're not going to help you. You just got to beat your guy. And that mentality I've never liked that, and I think he should have changed that, and he never has. And maybe he had a chance to do that with Robert, and I didn't want to listen, or whatever the case was. I don't know enough about the last 2 or 3 teams, to be perfectly honest with you. Obviously, I know a lot more from the first up through the 20 season than I do of the ins and outs of the last 3 or 4 years, 4 or 5 years now. So to me, there's that philosophical idea of here's how we're going to win. We're going to run the zone stretch on first down. And I don't know how many times I charted the first 7-8 years for him and showed him this is what you're doing on first down. You can't be this predictable on first down. I don't know how many times I would say it's okay to run a bunch set. It's okay to, move a guy around. For some of your older fans listening right now, NC State fans, Mike O'Kane could not beat NC State, could not beat UNC to save his life. And then when he was the OC, he couldn't beat State. But he could not beat Carolina to save his life. But man, he was really fucking good with Torrey Holt. And that's when I was in school, and I remember, to me, that's coaching. You move a guy around, everybody in the building knows he's going to get the football, and he still found a way to get him the football. And I feel like Dave has lacked that, even with a J. Sam, even with Naheem, even with a Jacoby Myers, even with, some of the better playmakers that they've had this year with Joe Lee, the last 2 years with Joe Lee. The number I was told for Joe Lee's NIL the first year was kind of embarrassing. And then he went back and basically got a raise. And you would think incumbent in that raise would be he would be more involved in the offense. And, Josh Goodson, the ultimate Dave Doeren defender, we had a bet the first week of the season. I said, Josh, if Joe Lee catches 7 passes for 100 yards and a touchdown, then I'll start believing in your 5-1, 6-0 nonsense. I said, even if State wins the game, even if he has 2 catches or whatever. And when he was barely involved in that first game, I'm like, it never changes with him in terms of his approach offensively. There's always a little bit of let's throw a leak to the third string tight end. Let's get Pharaoh McKeever on the goal line instead of Matt Days after, playing his guts out in that football game down in Death Valley in 16. So to me, that's where it starts for NC State. You got to get a guy who can give you a little bit of an edge, not Charlie Weiss schematically or the big brain on Bill Belichick, but you got to get a guy who can be a little bit creative and understand you're probably not going to have more talent than the other team. It's probably going to have to be a little bit of a give your players a chance. I see a lot of that with Duke. Last couple of years, to be honest with you. I mean, they've had good players, don't get me wrong, and obviously they paid a lot of money for this kid for Tulane and the kid from Texas the year before. But I remember going to see Duke in Carolina when Drake May was there. Drake May's best game of his Carolina career over there, and it was Riley Leonard and Drake May, and I was like, there's a lot of help going on offensively that I don't see when I go to an NC State game. So I kind of think that's job one. The other part of it, you have to have a financial investment. But as Carolina and Bill Belichick and Mike Lombardi are proving right now, you can spend a lot of money and get the wrong players. And that's where I kind of feel for Dave in the sense, we talked to him down in Charlotte about Brandon Cisse, and I know that's the kind of player that he'd love to get and other people didn't want, and he turned him into a starter, and you could see the trajectory like a Garrett Bradbury or a Bradley Chubb, where that's the kind of unearthed gem that turns into a high draft pick, and people are like, where did he get that guy from? And I think he really enjoyed that part of college football. So you got to combine that with a guy who can kind of coach you up and really kind of understand the new landscape of college football. Yeah, maybe you can't get Mensa or the high price quarterback from Tulane, but can you go get? Can you find the right running backs? Can you find the right parts? Positional value is another thing I think they've really struggled with in terms of if you think about baseball, Major League Baseball, and what positions do you invest in defensively? Gosh, it just feels like at any point they just they'll spend a bunch of money on a bunch of receivers, and then I'm like, well, you need like a better offensive line, or you need someone on defense who can make a play. And that part of it's been tough to watch because I don't feel like he has made the right adjustment there.
I think that goes back to what Alec was talking about on your second point with the window and the trajectory. Like recruiting, especially defensively, over the last handful of years has trended in a direction that does not give me a lot of hope as a fan. And then you couple that with, and granted, Drake Thomas, Isaiah Moore, Peyton Wilson, Corey Durden, like those guys up front, they'll fill in a lot of gaps for you, right? So we'll definitely acknowledge that. But bigger picture, right, not trending in the right direction. And then, there are a lot of games that we'll watch back and write about where in the moment you see the missed read from CJ, or the go route is there and it just it doesn't get executed, and you chalk that up to maybe like in the moment mistakes. But when you put enough of those kind of games and performances together where you don't hit the long ball and you are running every time on first down, it's like, okay, well, now we've got a clear picture, right? Like going back to the nuance point that you brought up. And I feel like especially the offensive malaise or repetitiveness is one of the cries that we hear from a lot of folks on like the repetitiveness of Dave. I guess to put it as plainly as possible, do you feel like it's fair for State fans to be over Doeren? I know we can all sit here and put the nuance in of like we respect what he's done and what he's built with what he's had, but do you feel like it's fair for State fans to be over Doeren at this point?
Yeah, I mean, listen, 13 years. If you get, one of the hurdles that have been missing, a 10-win season, if you get a division title or an ACC title, obviously, you'd think it would change the equation, right? But we saw this in basketball. It doesn't always. Also, like Larry Fedora, he won their division. He won 11 games, and he had 2 bad years, and he was gone at Carolina. So I think it's fair to be over where the program is now in year 13. And to some of your points about, well, what is the recruiting plan on defense? What is the recruiting plan on offense? How much did it take to figure out that, the quarterback shuffle, Morris, Leary, McCall, my guy Bailey Hockman, how long did it kind of figure out, like, okay, this is what we're, it just felt like he never wanted to, until last year, just turn the thing over to a freshman and groom him, and develop him. And I think that's unfortunate because he's had a couple of different chances. And the thing about CJ Bailey is, I think they were smart to get him back this year, but obviously they would be super fortunate to get him back next year. It's just the way college football has changed. And I wish there were contracts. I wish there were ways to sign a player like CJ Bailey. Hey, man, every college in the country looked at you and didn't want you. I believe in you. I'm giving you a 4-year contract. And I would love for college football, to get to that point. But
Makes too much sense.
But I think it's totally
sense,
fair. Yeah, I got to tell you, probably since the Clemson game down there with Larry, the last, what is that, 4 years now? 22, 23, 24, 25. The last 4 years, I've had season tickets. My family's had season tickets. And my kids go to the games. And we went to that Clemson game. And I just remember how excited they were. One was in middle school, one was in high school. Just how excited they were to have game day and like NC State be on this stage. And, first half of that game looked good. And then the second half, their disappointment. You experience things differently when A, your money's involved, and B, your emotions and your family are involved, and you see it kind of through them. I saw it for 20 years writing about it, and not being there wasn't an emotional investment for me. It was just, that was my job. That's what I did. I enjoyed it. And like I said, seeing Joe Selfo, talking to Naheem and seeing Naheem when he comes home, these are all things that I enjoy. Mike Glennon, these are all things I enjoy. But it's been totally different the last 4 years. And I remember leaving the BC game when Drake Thomas was called for the dumbest penalty. Like, that never happens at home. That never happens at Alabama, Georgia, even Auburn.
We're really hitting the highlight reel of like the worst moments we've experienced as fans, which is super fair.
But that's the kind of game that chips away at you. And it's also the kind of game that has cost Dave. Because if you win it, now all of a sudden it would have been, 2 years in a row with an unbeaten home record. Now all of a sudden you got something to sell. You would have won 10 games that year too. Now all of a sudden you got something to sell. And it just feels like when the money's on the table, he comes up short, and then there's nothing to sell at the end, And to Alex's point, he did a great job after 19, he did a really Dave Doeren 2.0. I consider after 19 to be the 2.0. I think he did a great job reconfiguring the program. Obviously, Peyton Wilson was a huge part of that. Oh my gosh, what a tour de force Peyton was. But I give Dave a lot of credit for that change in 20 in a pandemic, after a 4-8 year when people were ready to get rid of him, and changing his staff, the change in the scheme. I give him a lot of credit for what he did, but it just feels like it's hit a natural ending point where you're like, you know what, had a good run. It's probably time for someone else to take a crack at it and get some fresh eyes on it.
Yeah. I'm just glad nobody brought up, and I know I'm doing Kyle Bambar. So moving on, your last point is a good segue, actually. And it's weird to talk about potential coaching candidates in the middle of a season when the job is not currently open, but it does seem like it's probably something that we're going to be talking about sooner rather than later. And there's been an interesting debate back and forth with the fan community over the course of the last week or so of talking about somebody like James Franklin. Once he was let go, there was an immediate response of saying, "Oh, that would be a great fit for NC State," and then there was sort of like a backlash to that of people thinking either he's not good enough for us or he's just Dave Doeren with money, and there's like a whole debate back and forth on it, and it begs the question, what kind of pool of candidates do you think State is in for a coaching candidate? Like, do you think the James Franklins of the world or similar are the type of coaches that could come here, or do you think he's set up for a bigger job or that sort of thing?
I think the entire equation has been changed in college football. So it's like all coaching searches are different now. And I think relationships matter. The connection to the area, the opportunity, the timing, your career matters. Debbie Yao desperately wanted James Franklin to be NC State's football coach. She could not get him. He was at a different point in his arc. And then in 17, Will Wade would have been first on her list that year. And she talked to Pat Kelsey. She wanted to talk to Will. She talked to Kevin. And once Will, when I saw Will, whatever it was, a month ago now, we talked about this. And he basically said, I tried to talk Shaka into taking the state job in 12 when Godfrey got it. He's like, I tried to talk him into it. I said, we could go down there. We can clean up. But in 17, he was in a different place, and eyes got a little big, and LSU ends up being that. And at that time too, not to get off on a basketball conversation, at that time too, I remember his agent was the same as Dave's and the same as Godfrey's. And he told me, he told me, he goes, you got to be crazy to take these ACC jobs. You don't get paid as much. You got to play against Roy and Kay. He's like, I can go to the SEC. I can send any of my guys to the SEC, and they get more money. There are no expectations. They're football schools. If they win, great. If they don't, they get paid. And I don't think the fans at large understand that, like that mentality from 10 years ago now. I think where the current climate is in football, like I said, I think your investment in your roster is more important than your investment in your coach.
Absolutely.
And I almost feel like an NFL model awaits us in the sense that instead of sitting here and being like, man, we better get someone for an 8-year contract, I almost feel like it could become, it's not there yet, obviously, but it could become, we're going to get a guy for 2 or 3 years. If it works and he kicks ass and ends up at Texas A&M, so be it. If it doesn't work, well, we're moving on to the next option. And I wonder how much of college football will become that, because it's an interesting thought process. Obviously, there's a lot of big jobs open this year. What does big mean? Again, James Franklin specifically, I think James Franklin's going to end up at Stanford. No one has this thought other than me, but I think he's going to end up at Stanford.
Wow.
He made his bones at Vanderbilt where no one gave a fuck about football. He won 9 games twice and was a conquering hero. He got fired for winning 9 games at Penn State. He was winning 10 and 11.
Yeah.
So he was on track to win 9 this year and got fired. Okay. Plus he's got a tremendous buyout, which has offset language in it. So I could see, and that private school, look at the big changes in private schools. I know you got SMU, you got Duke. I know Indiana's not a private school, but they kind of have operated like one in all of this with the amount of money they have from the Big Ten network. I think you've seen Vanderbilt. I said Vanderbilt, right? With Pavia and what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
These schools are on the come up because they've invested heavily in their players and their roster. And they've had smart coaches. I think that's part of it too. So that's what I would love to see NC State. Like I have advanced Tommy Rees. I don't know Tommy Rees. He's 33 years old. I know from my relationship with Bubba Cunningham and my knowledge of Boo Corrigan and my knowledge of Nina King, that Notre Dame thing, same with Jim Phillips. That Notre Dame thing, it's a fucking cult, man. And they believe it. Like I know it's an actual religion, Catholicism, but they believe in that Notre Dame thing more than they believe in anything. And I could see Boo kind of tapping someone like Tommy, younger offense coordinator, and say, okay, well, let's see what resources we can put behind you, and let's see what position we can put you in to be successful. And to me, that makes more sense than John Gruden. That makes more sense than Jimbo Fisher. That makes more sense than even James Franklin, because, James Franklin, the knock on him was he couldn't win the big one. He couldn't beat ranked teams. And no one can really beat ranked teams, by the way, other than Brent Key. He's the only one who can. I think he needs to go somewhere. I don't think any SEC team is going to hire James Franklin. Now, I could listen to him saying, I'm going to go to Virginia Tech, because he could probably do the same thing, win 8 or 9 games, and people would be really happy, to be honest, after what they've gone through the last couple of years. So I could be talked into that, but I don't think any SEC team is going to touch him. Like, I know he went on TV trying to sell himself. I don't see it. If you're Florida and you're Auburn and you're or Ole Miss once Lane leaves, you're going to be like, yeah, let me go get the guy who can't win big games. No, and pay him a shit ton of money. I don't see that. But I think, Dillingham at Arizona State, obviously people are going to knocking on his door. Like Summerall at Tulane, people are going to knock on his door. The one guy we know Boo has hired was Monken at Army. It's probably past him, right? Maybe his brother. I don't know. I don't know. That's why I default to Reese. But the other one who might come open is Brian Kelly. That wouldn't surprise me. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I'm serious. Because he can't where's he going to go? No one in the SEC is touching him.
Yeah.
He could go to Wisconsin, but it sounds like Wisconsin's AD said this week they're not getting rid of Fickle.
Yeah.
Right? And while I'm just spitballing here, the other guy who I think has crept back into this triangle area with his performance this year is Scott Satterfield. And I thought Carolina should have hired him in 19, and they were like, no, he can't recruit. And of course, anyone can recruit at Carolina, first of all. But number two, like, what does that really mean? Why that whole paradigm has shifted? What can you recruit? Can you do this? Can you do that? That's a guy I would keep an eye on too. That feels like well, remember him? Oh yeah. And they're on track to do whatever it wouldn't surprise me to see them at least play for the Big 12 title this year.
I'm going to chime in. I hope I have internet, but I've been having some audio issues. But that'd be hilarious. It ended up being Satterfield because we play App State next year.
That's right. They should have played him this year, but that would be kind of funny.
I was hoping that you might have had a different set of names, Joe. That's what I'll.
But I get what you're saying after what I do believe will be a successful run with Will Wade. I certainly understand. And gosh, talk about timing, right? first of all, Kurt Cignetti was on Chuck Amato's staff the whole time. And then he got a job at Alabama, but went to Indiana, Pennsylvania. Then he went to Elon. The dude was just out there begging to be hired by somebody, and obviously knew what he was doing. So that's always my. We went through this whole thing in the triangle, and I'm not gonna pretend how much you guys listen to my show. I'm not gonna pretend how much you guys know about Duke, Carolina, and ECU as well. But we went through a wave when Chuck Amato was hired in 2000, where all of the local schools were like, that's it. We got to go get a long-time assistant with a connection to the school, loves the school. Then you see John Bunning at Carolina. You see Ruffin McNeil at ECU. Scott Satterfield, you can make the case at App State, obviously a little bit long after Jerry Moore, but it was like a keep it in the family. Let's get someone who loves and knows and all this other stuff. But none of them were head coaches before. And it became when they all washed out, and Ruff was really the last of them to wash out. We went to this whole thing of, well, the only thing we have to do is hire a head coach. And so you get Tom O'Brien, and I had a tremendous relationship with Tom. I thought Tom did a good job. You had Larry Fedora from Southern Miss, right? And then obviously ECU has done what ECU's done. Scotty Moe and Mike Houston and some of the other things that they've done. But to me, I think you have to be willing to give somebody a chance. And Dabo Sweeney is probably a great example of this. He was a receivers coach. Like you can either do it or you can't. And you'll know pretty quickly. That's why I kind of like this new idea of giving some people a chance in those first 2 or 3 years to figure something out. And if you can't, you move on. But yeah, like Lane Kiffin was pleasuring himself down in Boca Raton at Florida fucking Atlantic.
Yeah.
Like, goddamn.
Yeah, the idea of the 2 to 3 years and then moving on, because we've seen that with the players now, with the way that the portal works, and teams that are at the level of NC State, that tier, the players are using those places almost as stepping stones, like job interviews, to go to a bigger place. You look at Kevin Concepcion killing it at Texas A&M right now. So that's going to continue to happen. And we haven't yet seen that happen as much with college football. It's happened a lot in college basketball historically, where somebody might go to like a really small team, one of the smaller conferences, and then
Rick Pitino, Iona. Yeah,
exactly.
Will Wade, McNeese.
And then jump back. But for NC, the idea that it's very intriguing for NC State to become one of those places where they could get the next Mike Elko that has connections and is basically just using NC State as a stepping stone to jump into the SEC as an ultimate goal for them. But it might work out, because it worked out for Duke, obviously. So it's an interesting idea, and honestly, I wouldn't be opposed to it, because you've got like guys like the offensive coordinator at Oregon right now, and that guy's probably poised to take a jump to another job. So I would probably lean towards that, because you can get guys that have operated in big budget operations and understand what it takes to run that sort of an organization, how the money flows, as opposed to going and getting a lower tier head coach with the group of five that has to then learn the NIL structures and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's double-edged sword to it, and that's definitely part of it. One of the things I like when you get a head coach is, there's a big culture aspect to these things, and it's hard to measure. Sometimes it sounds a little cheesy when you talk about it, but it does exist, and you can see how bad things go when you don't have that. One guy in the NFL that has a reputation of just being a whiz as a football mind, and we're learning slowly, maybe that isn't exactly the case, but Mike McDonald, they have issues down there, right? And that's not a guy who had been a head coach before, and I think they're at 1-6 now. And you see this in college as well with some of these, and so it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I'm on board with, I like what Joe said. You got to give somebody a chance, right? At the end of the day, you're placing a bet here, right? And so if everybody knew the answer, Kurt Cignetti would have been hired 20 years ago by somebody, right? You don't know the answer, so you have to take your shots. But that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I still lean personally towards someone who's been a head coach, just because I think establishing a culture like that is important. This is a big deal at Arizona State, right? They have a great culture down there, and that's helped them a lot. So something like that is something that has been important to me, because I think it's been part of what's helped Dave be successful too. You mentioned Peyton Wilson earlier. Like, he had a huge impact on the field. I think he had a huge impact off the field as well. And being able to have something like that, and if that guy comes in and wins and leaves in 2 years, it's like you said about Duke. I mean, that happened, but you had something you could sell at that point, right? I mean, Duke football has always been a joke to people, and they've been better as of late. But if you get something like that, he won what, 9 games in back-to-back seasons, Elko, I think. And then you have something that you can sell. Maybe more money comes in, right? And then somebody is interested in that job that otherwise might not have been, or something like that. But to make that leap, I think you have to get someone that gets people excited. And to me, that gets rid of a guy like Satterfield, right? I mean, the money has to come out at some point if you want to get a hold of the talent that ultimately makes the coach successful. So I think that gets rid of some guys like that. If I hear someone say John Gruden, I'm going to put my head through the wall. I'm not in on that one at all. I think we've proven that hiring the big, huge name that's a retread is just idiotic. I mean, we're seeing it 20 miles from here right now. It's not working. It doesn't work. I think we got to get rid of that as a thought. But you can see why it exists, right? Because people want something that makes them excited, and I think that is kind of the key to unlocking some of the financial stuff. Like, Will Wade is a winner historically, but he's also like a great messenger, and people are excited about that. And that's got to be the first step. I think that's the spark that you have to light if you want to see sort of that ball start rolling downhill that you're talking about, where Duke now has Manny Diaz its second coach, but he's winning, right? And there's money to spend on Darian Mensah and all that crap.
You didn't do it on purpose, but Kenny Dillingham, 33-year-old offensive coordinator, first-time job, Arizona State.
Yeah.
So it just, like you said, if we knew the answers, you run it all and you know it in advance. So it's a hard position. Also, NC State needs to come up and show, kind of like Virginia Tech did, with their structure, their board of trustees essentially saying, here, this is what we're going to do financially. NC State needs to do that. Quite frankly, I can tell you, before Kevin left basketball, he told me in the middle of the season last year, he's like, we're not going to spend to the $20 million revenue cap as a school. And I was like, what? Why? And he was like, think about it. What have we done with our football roster? I'm like, oh, hey, you might be right. He's like, I know I'm not getting whatever percentage. So I think what's important for NC State is, obviously, Brian McMurray is now in charge of the men's basketball program. That's pretty clear. Okay. And bully for him. And basketball, you could probably have one guy who could get you a payroll. You probably can, right? We're about to find out. Football's different. I think football, you need, and I think NC State now has this in fan support, but you got to go back to a little bit of that Bobby Purcell model, getting a little from a lot of people. But I also think you have to have the structure side of it from the university. And I hope Kevin Howell sees that. I hope he sees what Virginia Tech's doing and realizes. And Kevin's gone to sporting events for the last. I started covering events at NC State in the late '90s, and I mean, ever since the arena opened, Kevin's been there. Like, Kevin's a State fan. I don't think we can undersell that. Obviously, I have my own personal quibbles with Randy Woodson, but that's just years of back and forth, if you will, or being ignored, if you will. But I think Kevin's really important in this, and I think the university's super important in this. And it comes at a time, obviously, where the federal government is putting the screws on some grants and funds and everything else. So it's a difficult situation. I wonder where private capital comes into this equation. When does the ACC start either revealing publicly that they've had those conversations, or how close they are? Or, I know from the Hurricane side, it's just a matter of time before that whole area is called the Lenovo Park. the arena or whatever, the center. It'll be the Lenovo Stadium. I could break news on your program. I believe phase 1 of the outdoor construction project is going to be Lenovo moving their headquarters to that parking lot.
Oh,
not a parking deck.
Yeah.
So keep your eye on that. Some people are not going to be very happy about that, obviously.
Wow.
Some people will be, and some people won't be. So we'll see what happens there. But I think that's where, when they said, oh, we're giving up the name Carter Finley or whatever they announced a few years ago, I was like, okay, we're starting to get serious about some other revenue streams. But obviously the biggest one is going to come from the school itself. And I think they need to make a public show of it. UNC's got a $60 million budget advantage over NC State this year. I mean, I don't have the wherewithal to go back and ever look, but I feel fairly confident in saying two schools from the same university system on the same level in the ACC or any other conference have never had this wide of a disparity in their budgets before from state schools. Like I refuse to believe percentage wise and volume wise that these two schools have ever been this far apart, and they are. And that's where Virginia Tech this summer was like, hey, our expectations exceed our investment, and you have to fix the investment part of this. And we'll see how it works out for Virginia Tech. I certainly think NC State's a better job than Virginia Tech. I do. But I can certainly listen to what Virginia Tech wants to argue. But I think NC State's in a position where you can sell this city, you can sell the different opportunities that you have. Where are they going to be in a few years too? That's part of the reason why I didn't love Randy. I would have played nice with Carolina because I think Carolina will bring you along to wherever they end up. But that's probably a discussion for another day.
I just had a random thought too. Do you think Wade Avenue was at all a selling point with Will Wade?
Will is super interesting. Will is really fucking smart. I think it's, if you haven't figured that out already, I think people are going to see that pretty quickly. If you'd like to transition to a basketball conversation, if we have that on the schedule today, I'm not sure. I went and talked to Will in 2017, in February 2017, when Mark had already been fired, because I knew who Will's agent was at the time, and I knew, if you will, Debbie's type. So I went and talked to him, and we were up at VCU, and I just remember he has a play sheet as a basketball coach. There's big Norman Dale vibes with Will Wade. He takes it out. He actually looks at it, he'll slap it around in his hands. And my team's on the floor. If you watch the Purdue game, which they lost, he coached his ass off. They went zone, they went press, they went trap, they did this. They ran some flex. They did, whatever your wet dream of is, whatever a perfect, coachy coach is. That's Will Wade. And that he has this, as you mentioned, the messaging and personality go with it. That's obviously a rare combination. And I think the way that he's built his roster this year, I'll have some questions about offensively. I will. Do they have enough scoring? Do they have enough shooting? I have questions about that, but I don't have any questions about their toughness. I don't have any questions that they're going to defend. I don't have any questions that they're going to be really well coached. And I think they're going to be really, really good in the ACC. And they're going to make the ACC tournament. I think they're going to beat Kansas at home, and everyone's going to be walking around with a runner in their leg for, until they get into ACC play, to be perfectly honest with you. So I think there's a lot of good things in front of them, but that gets back to the opportunity, right? You have the financial investment. They don't get now. Will, I can, there's a little bit of, I know a little bit of how Will got here. And I saw someone who was like, oh, is Mike White still the first choice? Will was not Boo's first choice. Will was Andy McMurray's first choice. He was the Boosters' first choice. They are the ones who said, hey, man, we haven't had to have this conversation yet with you, but if you want our fucking money, guess what? Where we want to stay. So that's not to diminish the relationship that Will has with Boo now. But I think, when I went over there and saw Will, he said, He's like, I basically got the job when I told Boo, I don't want a single dime for the building, for the facility. I don't want any of that stuff. You just give it all to the players. You got to give me money for the players. And obviously Darren Williams was a huge part of that. But that kind of investment was a signal. Hey, we're serious. And I think that's where that's where NC State has to get in terms of football and what their plan is. And that was really my big problem with Randy Woodson at the end of his tenure was he stopped making any kind of public statements. He never defended a Mark Emmert vote that he made, in 2020 or whatever year. It was a ridiculous vote. He never defended never explained or defended the SMU Cal Stanford vote. You're the highest paid employee in the state of North Carolina in the NC up until Bill Belichick, the NC State system. Chancellor, excuse me. I think he was the highest paid public. He was the highest paid chancellor at a public university. And you can't answer a question as to why you voted one way or another about Mark Emmert, the leader of the NCAA, who was clearly inept. You can't answer a question about why you voted to admit 3 teams to a league. Just say, hey, man, it was the money. That's all you had to say. It didn't have to be this long, Abraham Lincoln speech about how fucking great you are. Just the talk. You're the head of a public university. So I hope Kevin kind of takes this opportunity to say, here's what NC State is about, and here's what we're going to be going forward. Because like I said, I've been going to games at the arena ever since it opened. I'm telling you, Kevin's been there for 95% of them. So that, to me, that's a good sign for State.
Yeah. It's hopefully the opportunity is there for him to do that. I know that's been an area that people have been frustrated with Boo about versus Debbie Yao. But that's a conversation for another day. Just like basketball is, we could talk to you for hours, and we definitely appreciate all the time. Hopefully we can have you back on later on in the basketball season, maybe when we get closer to Selection Sunday, and if the season is going the direction that we hope that it is going to go in, because Will Wade has made a lot of big promises, and we'll have to suss out at the end whether he lives up to those promises or not. But as
Can he break the law? Can he break the law of the wolf? Can he be the one?
Can he be the one? We're really hoping so. Not knock on wood. So we generally end our show with a question of the day, and speaking of the law of the wolf. And this idea of not always living up to expectations, and NC State shit always has a way of rearing its head. So when that does happen, what's your go-to? What's your vice? What's your drink of choice? Like what do you drown your sorrows in?
Yeah, I'm new to the bourbon game, but I was spoiled pretty quick by my guy Ken and my guy Chris. E.H. Taylor Straight Rye was one of the first bottles that I got, and I was like, oh, this stuff is really, really good. Didn't realize it was like a $400 bottle. And I'm up in D.C. for the ACC championship, and there was a liquor store. D.C.'s got a little bit different rules when it comes to what's available, what's not. They had the $400 bottle of the Colonel. They had the $200 bottle of the Colonel. And I was like, what could be the big difference? I'll get the $200 bottle. Well, I got it, and I got a case of Miller Lite or Coors Light or something. And literally, all the people who ran the ACC tournament, they don't have hospitality on the last night. So I was the one, because I was like, win or lose, I'm drinking this Colonel Taylor and this beer. So it ended up being back at the hotel where the ACC ops were staying. And it was probably about 8, 9, 10 people. And I was the one who provided all of the drinks, because I was getting it, win or lose, seeing the ACC title for the first time, since '87. And I can't sit here and tell you I was a State fan back in '87. I did always like Jim Valdano, but I don't remember like Vinny Del Negro cutting down the nets in '87, right? So for me, the bourbon, the dark liquor has kind of moved into the top of my rotation as my go-to post game, if you will.
I could be completely wrong, but I feel like in some of those live reactions in DC, you were mentioning it maybe, especially last night. I feel like you were.
Oh yeah,
we were feeling lively. We were talking about what was to come. I was like, all right, let's go.
We unburdened by FCC rules and a boss and all
Here
those
we
other
go.
things.
Yeah.
We're
Some
on our own,
people,
man.
yeah, some people really, really, really like drunk Giglio. So it
You
can
got
be
you
it can
guys were
be
flying
difficult to handle
loose.
though.
You guys were flying loose, and those are
Oh,
some of
at
the
the
best shows that you've done.
the Rialto for the Duke game
Yeah.
to go to the Final Four. Oh my. Best to burn that tape, but we had a really good time.
Alec, what do you think?
I usually do my go-to drink most of the time is a whiskey sour. And the whiskey can change, but that's usually one of mine. If it's really like State was about to tie the game against Clemson in a ACC Atlantic deciding game and got an illegal formation penalty on fourth down. Which is what happened in 2017. If you don't remember,
Uh-huh.
we may have
Uh-huh.
to step into Long Island territory, which has
Oh
been
dear.
achieved before. But yeah, probably a whiskey sour most of the time.
Alec, I don't think I've heard another person bring up a specific play more than you bringing up
So
that one.
here's the thing, guys. Everybody talks about Kyle Bambard so much. I'm like, that game didn't ultimately it would have been huge, but if you beat Clemson in 2017, you are playing in the ACC championship game against a Miami team that's playing like a wounded duck at that point. I mean, that is a ACC championship, and they were better than that Clemson team that day, except for like two
Yep.
plays where they just fell on their face, which is always kind of. I mean, I said this on the show before. I don't want to derail this too much, but you started this now, Jackson. You started this point here.
It's on me.
Started
Tax
this.
Chess raised his hand.
We were
Yeah, it's on me.
in that game. State was down by 3 points. They got the ball back, and Ryan Finley had not thrown an interception all year and hadn't been sacked since week two. On first down, he fell down and sacked himself. On the second play, he threw an interception. How does that happen? How does that? That was there's your Long Island iced tea. There's the reason for it. How did that?
No, that ties
Anyway,
in. That
continue.
ties in perfectly with our NC State shit coping mechanisms segment. Normally, I have already done the maximum amount of damage that is possible to inflict on myself through an NC State shit experience. So that's typically Tito's mixed with anything. But the post game the post state shit incident is almost always a combination of Propel and Liquid IV because I already know that the next day is going to be horrific if I don't take immediate action. So it's the culmination of emotional and physical pain for sure. So you gotta control what you can, and for me, that's the electrolytes.
I'll give Trey's answer since he's becoming more pixelated by the minute. He said his answer is blue moon because once in a blue moon something good happens, and I think that's pretty clever.
Got the picture over here, the blue moon on the from the South Carolina game. The guy's drinking the blue moon. It's my favorite picture Ethan Hyman's ever taken of NC State from Bank of America Stadium. The one guy's drinking a blue moon. The one guy is just devastated.
That's
and
iconic.
The girlfriend, the girlfriend or the wife or wherever she is, she's just giving it it's okay, babe. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
For me, it's not so much the drink as it is once something like that happens, I just feel a lot of shame that this is how I've spent my time, and I've chosen to dedicate my life to following this team. And like I live up here in New Jersey, and I live around a lot of Jets fans, and they just feel a lot of guilt that they've given this to their children now. And like
the Jets still have fans.
The Jets, surprisingly, they're still out here chugging along, and my kids live hundreds of miles away from Raleigh, from where I grew up, but they are still growing up as NC State fans, and I'm sort of implanting this into them, and that's just the torture that hopefully things can change with every passing generation. So generally, I'll just like have a big bowl of Tillamook cookies and cream ice cream and just sort of be sort of drowning my shame in more like as junk food just to make matters worse, and then I'll feel terrible after the bowl is done, and I just feel all around garbage, and that's generally the best way to end a great Saturday night. All right. So on that note, we'll wrap it up here. But Joe, we really appreciate you giving us the time, and hopefully we'll be able to have you on again soon. So for all of us here at the Lotcast, we'll catch you guys next time.